Okay, so we're working on statistics and we're working on a couple of distinctions in data. One of them is going to be quantitative versus qualitative data, and the other one is going to be about continuous versus discrete data. So the first one we're going to look at here is quantitative versus qualitative. Okay, so the root words here are quantity and quality. All right, so quantitative versus qualitative data. Okay, so if I have quantitative data, this is data that talks about numbers that are specifically counts or measurements. So an easy example here would be as if I grabbed the height of every single upper school student. If I have all the upper school students' heights, this is something that measures their height, and we're there. Now, I want to show you a small pitfall here. And I'm going to put this over here. Zip codes. All right, so zip codes are numbers. Sounds like it should be quantitative, but they're not a count or they're not a measurement. They're not a measurement of anything. They're literally just a name that we put on a piece of land, right? A region of a state or a region of our country. So this is actually a number that's used in the place of a name. So here, this is something that would be a qualitative piece of data, but not quantitative. So the question is begged, what is a qualitative piece of data? A qualitative piece of data is like a name or a label for something, okay? It does not represent a count or a measurement. So like if I had a list of every upper school student's names, right? So if I got all of your names, this would be a qualitative list rather than a quantitative one. Okay, so we also want to make a distinction between discrete versus continuous data. Okay, so both of these are numerical data. So these are both going to be types of quantitative data. Discrete data is something that is specifically countable. Okay, something that you number in terms of 1, 2, 3, etc. So, like, an example of this is the number of cats someone owns. Okay, you can count the number of cats that they own. Note, you can't have half a cat. Either you have a cat or you don't. You don't have part of a cat. So discrete data tend to be things that we can't have parts of. They have to be countable. Either I have one or I don't. Okay? So continuous data is slightly different. Continuous data has an infinite number of possible values. Now, it doesn't mean that this can go off to infinity. Now, if you think about this, between like 0 and 1, there's an infinite number of values. There's a half, there's a quarter, there's an eighth, and I can keep going in forever on that. And so it can have a bounded reality, but there has to be an infinite number of possible values. For example, temperature. At least is bounded below, so you can get to a lowest possible temperature. We call that absolute zero. However, between any two temperature measurements, there's an infinite number of possibilities along the way. So like it can be like 32 and 0.6 degrees Celsius out there. So every 2 units of temperature, you can always find one in between them. So you can always get more precise when you have continuous data. So with discrete data, precision is just in the number that you have. So something that you can have part of is definitely continuous. Something that you can't have part of, or it reduces to a smallest possible part, has to be discrete. Okay, so just to kind of review here, we have quantitative versus qualitative data. A shorthand way of thinking about this is that this is numbers and this is names. And that works for most cases. I mean, like the zip code thing is an oddball case, but that generally works. And another one that we talked about today is, once we are quantitative, is the data discrete or is it continuous? And ultimately, discrete data is something that only can be counted as wholes. So, but continuous can always be broken into more and more parts. So the example that I gave here is that this is like cats, and this is like degrees Celsius. You always have to have whole numbers of cats, but you can have parts of degrees. So this is the difference between discrete and continuous data, quantitative and qualitative. And remember, both of these are ultimately types of quantitative data because we're dealing with numbers, not names. All right, thank you.